The crash. The outermost edge of the Meridia system was where forgotten things went to die. Elrich preferred it that way. No people, no noise, no wars, just rust, fire, and the quiet hum of failing machines. He'd been working on a faulty ion turbine outside his workshop when the sky bled silver. The twin suns had turned the desert sand into burning glass, making every breath taste like metal and regret. That's when he saw it, something massive tearing through the upper atmosphere. It didn't fall like debris. It spiraled with purpose, wings stretched wide but limp, glowing faintly as it carved a burning line through the clouds. Elrich watched, frozen, as the creature vanished into the jagged cliffs west of the crater basin. He should have ignored it. Whatever had crashed wasn't his problem, probably another scavenger shot down by pirates, or space junk skimming too close to the planet's gravity well. But something pulled at him, that old mechanic's instinct that had kept ships flying during the war when everyone else had given up hope. That instinct whispered, "Go now." His old crawler groaned as he gunned it toward the crash site. The crater was massive, still steaming, the sand scorched black in perfect concentric circles. Debris scattered everywhere, but none of it made sense. The fragments weren't ship-grade metal. They curved unnaturally, organic, almost like bones. Elrich climbed down carefully, boots sliding on the loose rock. The heat hit him in waves, but he pressed forward until he reached the crater's center. That's where he found her. She lay curled in an impossible knot, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. 15 meters of alien grace reduced to broken wings and bleeding scales. Her hide was pearl-white, translucent, pulsing with faint bioluminescent patterns that flickered like dying stars. Barnacle-like parasites dotted her limbs, and her magnificent wings, built for soaring between worlds, were folded painfully beneath her massive frame. When her eyes fluttered open, they glowed like twin moons. A dragon. An actual dragon. Elrich knelt beside her, his breath caught somewhere between wonder and disbelief. She was clearly alien, nothing native to Meridia or any known system. Something ancient. Something lost. And she was dying. "Hey now," he murmured, hands raised peacefully. "I'm not going to hurt you." She growled, low and pitiful, barely managing to lift her great head. One claw scraped weakly at the scorched earth. Her entire body trembled with pain and exhaustion. Elrich made his choice. "All right, girl," he said, already moving toward his crawler. "Let's get you fixed up." The healing. The journey back to his compound was the longest ride of Elrich's life. He'd rigged a makeshift sled from his crawler's cargo bay, wrapping the dragon as best he could in emergency netting. Every bump sent her whimpering, every turn made his hands blister from steadying her massive weight. By the time they reached the workshop, the twin suns had set and alien stars blinked cold overhead. Elrich stared up at them once, then looked down at the broken creature before him. "You fell from there," he whispered. "Let's make sure it wasn't your last flight." He cleared his main hangar, shoving aside rusted engine cores and broken armor plating to make room. The dragon's body radiated heat like a forge, each breath misting the air with a metallic scent that made his tools hum in sympathy. Elrich worked through the night. He started with her wings, splinting the cracked bones with reinforced steel struts salvaged from a defunct atmospheric glider. Fusion thread and thermal wraps held everything together while her alien physiology did the rest. The barnacle-like parasites proved more challenging, hissing and smoking when he applied antiseptic foam. They weren't natural growths but some kind of living infection that had tried to root into her flesh. She shuddered each time he touched the wounds, but she didn't fight. Some part of her understood he was trying to help, or maybe she was simply too weak to resist. He adjusted the hangar's temperature to match her natural heat signature, monitored her vitals with biosensors meant for shuttle life support systems. Every few hours, he found himself talking to her, not because he thought she understood, but because the silence felt too heavy otherwise. "I don't know where you came from," he said once, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder as her breathing grew steadier. But I've put together a hell of a lot uglier things than you. She blinked at him, eyes unfocused but somehow locked onto his face. Her tail curled slightly, the first voluntary movement she'd made since the crash. Days passed in quiet repair. Elrich barely slept, feeding her through tubes crafted from oxygen lines and nutrient packs meant for long-haul pilots. As the wounds scabbed over and the parasites died, she began to shift restlessly. Her breathing deepened. Her claws flexed. Then one morning, Elrich entered the hangar to find her standing. Barely swaying, wings still bound and trembling, but standing. She turned as he approached, and this time her growl wasn't pain, it was recognition. Her great head tilted, nostrils flaring as she caught his scent. Elrich stood there, dirty and exhausted and amazed, and he smiled for the first time in years. "Look at you," he said softly. "Told you we'd get you flying again." She stepped forward, one careful paw at a time, until her head was level with his chest. Then, gently, she bowed. Something passed between them in that moment, something wordless and ancient. A bond forged not in language but in pain, survival, and trust. The bond. The name came to him while he was adjusting her wing stabilizers, Kayla. It slipped from his mouth like something he'd carried his entire life, and when she tilted her great head at the sound, he knew it was right. Kayla began exploring the compound with careful curiosity. She'd investigate his scrap heaps with her snout, sniff at hanging cables, and curl up beside the generator when its steady hum lulled her to sleep. Her intelligence was unmistakable, she tracked his movements with eerie focus, her luminous eyes not just seeing but reading him. When he cursed at a failed weld, she'd thump her tail against the floor. When he succeeded at a difficult repair, she'd make a deep rumbling sound that vibrated every tool on the walls. It was almost like laughter. Elrich found himself talking more than he had in years, not just to her, but to himself. About engines and the war, about the stars he'd once dreamed of chasing before everything went wrong. Kayla would listen quietly, her pale head resting on her talons, eyes half closed as if committing every word to memory. The real challenge came when he began unbinding her wings. The healing was complete, but her flight muscles had withered during recovery. He constructed an elaborate harness system with floating rails and adjustable tension. It looked ridiculous, like fitting a battleship for ballet, but it worked. Day by day, Kayla extended her wings further, lifted them higher, held poses longer. Her strength returned gradually, and with it, her majesty. She was easily 15 meters from nose to tail, her pearl-white scales now gleaming with health, the bioluminescent patterns pulsing in steady, hypnotic rhythms. One evening, as the twin suns painted the canyon walls blood orange, Elrich saw her wings fully stretched against the darkening sky. The sight took his breath away. The silver lines where her bones had fractured caught the light like spun glass, and her body, once broken and limp, had regained all its power and grace. She caught him staring and stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. Then she turned and leaped, not into flight, not yet, but into motion. A run across the flat clearing, wings flaring behind her like sails catching cosmic wind. For a moment, she was airborne. Just a heartbeat, but enough to remember what she'd lost and what she might reclaim. When she landed, her chest was heaving and her eyes were bright with something that looked suspiciously like joy. She was ready to fly again. But deep down, Elrich knew that meant she was ready to leave. And he wasn't sure his heart could handle that silence returning to his world. The departure. Elrich awoke to silence. Not the comfortable quiet of his workshop, but something hollow, an absence that made the air feel thin. His cot was still warm, shadows long across the floor, the generator humming its familiar tune. But the space beside it, where Kayla usually slept, was cold. "Kayla," he called softly. Then louder, "Kayla." Nothing. Her makeshift feeding station, rigged from a melted satellite dish, sat untouched. The tool rack she'd accidentally knocked over the night before still lay scattered across the workbench. But she was gone. Outside, fresh wind patterns swept the sand. Heavy claw prints led toward the cliffs, then simply vanished. No wing strokes in the dust, no trace of her passage beyond that point. Just empty air where something magnificent had been. Elrich stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of inevitability settle on his shoulders. He'd known this moment would come. He'd seen it in the way she stared at the sky these past few days, the way her wings trembled less with each stretch, the way her head tilted at the distant calls of thunderclouds riding the upper atmosphere. She didn't belong on the ground. Not among rust and silence and broken things. Still, the ache twisted deep. He spent that day wandering the compound like a man without purpose. He cleaned her sleeping area, folded the tarp he'd used to cover her wounds, set aside the specialized tools he'd crafted for her care. On the hangar wall, in carbon ink that would outlast the building itself, he etched her name, Kayla. Just that. As if by writing it, he could keep some part of her tethered to this place. That night, he sat on the ridge above the crater where he'd first found her. The stars were brilliant, thousands of them scattered like frost across the infinite black. He imagined her up there, beyond the atmosphere, sailing the cosmic currents between worlds. A shape of silver fire cutting through the dark. He smiled, though it hurt, because somewhere in the vast emptiness above, she was flying again. And maybe that meant he'd succeeded after all. The silence on Meridia deepened, not in volume, but in weight. Elrich returned to his old routines, repairing salvaged engines, maintaining his equipment, watching the twin suns rise and set over the wasteland he called home. But something had changed. The solitude that once felt like peace now felt like waiting. As if the universe had opened a door he couldn't quite see, and all he could do was hope that someday, something would walk through it again. The return. 3 months passed before the sky sang again. Elrich was knee-deep in a stubborn fusion core, cursing the day he decided to fix it instead of scrapping it for parts, when the shadow fell across his workshop. Too large for a cloud, too steady for debris. He looked up and nearly dropped his plasma torch. Kayla circled overhead, her pearl-white scales gleaming in the afternoon light, wings fully extended and strong. But she wasn't alone. 3 smaller shapes flanked her, dragons like her, but different. One was deep blue with silver markings, another burnished gold, the third a rich emerald that caught the light like cut gems. They landed in formation outside his compound, and Elrich's heart hammered against his ribs as Kayla approached. She moved with fluid grace, no trace of the broken creature he'd pulled from that crater. Her eyes, those luminous moons, fixed on his face with unmistakable intelligence. And love. She bowed her great head just as she had that first day, and Elrich reached out with trembling fingers to touch the space between her eyes where a silver scar marked where the worst of her injuries had been. "Hello, girl," he whispered. "I wondered if you'd remember me." Her answering rumble shook dust from the rafters. The other dragons watched with patient curiosity as Kayla nuzzled against Elrich's chest, careful not to knock him over. She was larger now, he realized. Not just healed, but grown. Thriving. Whatever world she'd returned to had welcomed her home. But she'd come back. As if sensing his wonder, Kayla stepped aside and gestured with her snout toward the blue dragon. It approached slowly, carrying something in its claws, a crystalline formation that pulsed with inner light. The dragon set it carefully at Elrich's feet, then stepped back. A gift. A thank you. A remembrance. The golden dragon came next, offering a piece of what looked like solidified starlight. The emerald dragon brought a flowering branch from some impossible tree, its blossoms glowing with the same bioluminescence that marked Kayla's scales. Elrich knelt among the treasures, overwhelmed. "You didn't have to." Kayla's gentle rumble cut him off. She touched his shoulder with one careful claw, then looked meaningfully at the sky. The message was clear: this isn't goodbye. This is thank you. They stayed until sunset, the 4 dragons resting in his compound like it was the most natural thing in the world. Kayla curled up beside the generator just like old times, and for a few hours, Elrich's world felt complete again. When they finally took to the sky, Kayla was the last to leave. She hovered above the compound for a long moment, wings beating steadily, her luminous eyes fixed on the lonely figure below. Then she was gone, disappearing into the star-drunk darkness with her companions. But this time, Elrich didn't feel empty. He felt connected. Part of something larger than his small life on this forgotten world. He carefully gathered the gifts, placing them in his workshop where their gentle light would remind him that bonds forged in healing and trust transcend species, distance, and time itself. Outside, the meridian wind whispered across the sand, carrying the promise that somewhere among the stars, a dragon remembered the mechanic who'd refused to let her die. And maybe, just maybe, she'd return again someday, not as a broken thing seeking repair, but as family coming home. Elrich smiled and returned to his work, no longer alone in the universe. The end.